In the early 1972, the president of Uganda, Idi Amin, ordered the expulsion of his country's Asian minority, giving them 90 days to leave the country. At the time of the expulsion, there were about 80,000 individuals of Indian descent in Uganda, of whom 23,000 had their applications for citizenship both processed and accepted. Although the latter were ultimately exempted from the expulsion, many chose to leave voluntarily. The expulsion took place against the backdrop of Indophobia in Uganda, with Amin accusing a minority of Asians of disloyalty, non-integration, and commercial malpractice, claims that Indian leaders disputed. Amin defended the expulsion by arguing that he was giving Uganda back to the ethnic Ugandans. Many of those who were expelled were citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, and 27,000 emigrated to United Kingdom. Of the other refugees who were accounted for, 6,000 went to Canada, 4,500 refugees ended up in India, and 2,500 went to nearby Kenya. In total, some 5,655 firms, ranches, farms, and agricultural estates were reallocated along with cars, homes, and other household goods.
I had a dream sent last night from God. He has instructed me to throw out all Asians from the country. Uganda must be for Ugandans only. The Asians were brought here by the colonialists to build railway. The railway is now finished. Let the British have the Asians and the Amin soldiers have their dukas. They have exploited Ugandan people. I give the Asians 90 days to pack up and go.
The Hindocha family was also forced to leave Uganda in the early 1970s. They were granted residence in Sweden and settled in Mariestad, where their daughter Anni was born on 12 March 1982. Anni Hindocha met London-based millionaire Anni Dewani in London in 2009, after a mutual friend gave him her contact details. This is what Anni Dewani has to say about Anni. On our first date, I was instantly physically attracted to her, loved her bubbly personality and sensed that there was mutual chemistry. We fell in love with each other. We were both ambitious and shared a common view of the future. We were both headstrong and often argued with each other. They maintained a long-distance relationship until Hindoja moved to the UK in March 2010. He hired a private jet and whisked her to Paris, where he proposed in June 2010. After his stag party in Las Vegas, the couple, whose relationship was sometimes troubled, were married in a lavish £200,000 ceremony at Lake Powai near Mumbai, India, on 29 October 2010. They were planning to hold a civil ceremony in the UK in 2011 for friends who could not attend their wedding in India. After landing at Cape Town International Airport on 7 November 2010 for their honeymoon, Dewani and her husband took a domestic flight and stayed at Kruger National Park for 4 nights. On 12 November, the couple returned to Cape Town International Airport, where they met and engaged taxi driver Zola Tongo to drive them to the 5-star Cape Grace Hotel. On 13th November, having retained Tongo as a tour guide, the couple were driven through the city in his Volkswagen Charan in Gugulethu. Tongo drove past a barbecue restaurant and they continued to Surfside restaurant in Strand, where the couple dined. After their meal, Tongo drove the Dewanis back into Gugulethu. Shortly after they had turned off the main road, 2 armed men hijacked the vehicle. After driving a short distance, Tongo was thrown out from the taxi. Anni Dewani was robbed of his money, wallet, designer watch and mobile telephone, and after being driven for about 20 minutes, he was also thrown out from the car, and the men drove off with his wife cowering in the back seat. Shrien never saw his wife alive again. At 7:50 am on 14th November in Lingalettu West, Anni Dewani was found dead in the back of the Volkswagen Charan taxi. She had suffered a single gunshot wound to her neck. Police later confirmed Anni's Giorgio Armani wristwatch, a white gold and diamond bracelet, her handbag and her BlackBerry mobile phone were missing and assumed they were stolen. The items stolen in the robbery had an estimated value of over $6,000. The post-mortem examination revealed bruising on her inner leg, indicating she had been involved in a struggle. It also indicated she had died from a single gunshot that passed through her hand and neck, severing an artery. There was no sign of sexual assault. On 17th November, Dewani's body was released by the South African authorities and returned to the United Kingdom, accompanied by her husband, and her funeral took place in London on 21st November. As a result of a palm print found on the abandoned taxi, Zoli Ngeni was arrested on 16th November 2010. Ngeni made a videotaped confession in the presence of Captain Jonker of the South African Police Service, admitting involvement in hijack, armed robbery, and kidnapping operation. He described Shrien and Anni Dewani as victims and said Kwabe shot Anni Dewani during a struggle for her handbag. Zivamadoda Kwabe was arrested on 18th November 2010. After initial denials, Kwabe was allowed to consult with arrested co-conspirators Bolombo and Ngeni and subsequently admitted involvement in the hijack, armed robbery and kidnapping. He described Shrien and Anni Dewani as victims. He changed his story during an interview recorded later that day, saying the incident was a murder planned at the behest of Shrien Dewani. Monde Bolombo was arrested in the early hours of 18th November 2010 as a result of Kwabe providing his name to the police. After initially denying involvement, Bolombo made a recorded confession, admitting arranging a hijack and armed robbery operation. The confession did not mention a planned murder or Shrien Dewani's involvement. The following day, Bolombo changed his story, saying the operation was a planned murder at the behest of Shrien Dewani. Taxi driver Zola Tongo reported the hijacking to a police station in Gugulethu after he was ejected from the vehicle and made a statement saying he was a victim. The following day, Tongo appointed attorney and on 20th November he surrendered to police and said the operation was a planned murder that was staged to appear as a random hijacking at the behest of Shrien Dewani. Motive behind this murder is said to be that Shrien Dewani was a bisexual and had relationship with several men. Anni found out about this and was about to ask for divorce from Shrien Dewani. He orchestrated this murder to save his reputation in society. In South Africa, there was much media coverage of the case following the discovery of the body. With an economy reliant on tourism, tour operators reported an immediate drop in bookings as potential visitors became aware of the country's murder rate, on average 46 per day. There were also concerns the killings would negate the goodwill resulting from the 2010 FIFA World Cup. An episode of the BBC television documentary series Panorama in March 2012 reported that the original South African post-mortem report showed the bullet that killed Anni Dewani had passed through her left hand followed by her chest, and that the wound on her neck was an exit wound. The report said the bullet left an irregular gunshot exit wound, which suggested there had been a struggle. A second Panorama program broadcast in September 2013 revisited the case and highlighted numerous inconsistencies between the physical evidence, witness testimony, and the South African prosecutor's purported version of the events. In particular, it said the forensic evidence had not been collected properly and that it indicated an accidental shooting during the struggle rather than a deliberate killing. After a long legal battle, Shrien Dewani was extradited from the United Kingdom to South Africa on 7th April 2014. Upon arrival, he was arrested, charged, and ordered to stand trial for allegedly arranging the murder of his wife. He was charged with 5 offenses: conspiracy to commit kidnapping, robbery with aggravating circumstances, murder, kidnapping, and obstructing the administration of justice. He pleaded not guilty to all 5 charges. Dewani's trial began on 6 October 2014. He came out as a bisexual on the first day of his trial. Under cross-examination, the key witnesses who alleged Dewani's involvement, Zola Tongo, Zivamadoda Kwabe, and Monde Bolombo, contradicted their previous statements and each other on most of the key elements of the murder for hire story. Tongo and Bolombo were found to have fabricated telephone calls and text messages that did not exist and refused to identify a fifth conspirator referred to in taped recordings. Kwabe refused to explain to the court why Anni was driven into a residential area. On 20th November 2014, after the close of the prosecution's case, Dewani's counsel argued for the case to be dismissed, citing a lack of credible evidence linking his client to the crime. On 8th December, the application for dismissal was granted. Dewani was acquitted and exonerated on all involvements with the crime. Despite sensational media coverage alleging that this crime constituted the ultimate betrayal of a wife by her husband of 2 weeks, The evidence presented at trial showed that Anni Dewani's death was not the result of a contract killing. In fact, the only evidence in support of the allegation that the crime was a pre-planned murder came from the mouths of the criminals who arranged and carried out the disastrous armed robbery that resulted in Anni's death. The same individuals later found to have perjured themselves in exchange for the attractive plea deals and drastically reduced prison sentences. Although there remain some unknowns about the fateful evening based on the evidence presented in court and the conclusions reached by Judge Traverso in 2014 trial of Anni Dewani, it is possible to put together a timeline and evidence-supported narrative that closely approximates the true course of events. Waiting outside Cape Town International Airport, taxi driver Zola Robert Tongo is randomly approached by the Dewani couple who hire him as their driver and de facto tour guide. Whether on the lookout for a soft target or simply succumbing to opportunism, Tango makes the ill-fated decision to betray his affluent clients for his own financial gain. Unbeknown to the Devanis, soon after bidding them farewell on the night he meets them, Tongo contacts his friend, hotel receptionist Monde Bolombo, advising that he has identified a mark. Tongo tells Bolombo that in addition to the couple being well-dressed and bearing expensive jewelry, Mr. Dewani has also agreed to pay 10,000 Rand or $666 cash for a surprise helicopter ride for his new bride. Furthermore, he can be persuaded to bring the money out with him the following evening, ostensibly to pay the pilot in person to secure an attractive price for the excursion. The pair set about discussing how they can exploit the situation and devise a plan that involves Tongo taking the couple on an evening tour of the Gugulethu township, where they will fall victim to a seemingly random carjacking in which cash and valuables will be stolen. Tongo would report the hijacking to police and play the innocent victim. Bolombo recruits local street thugs Zivamadoda Kwabe and Zolil Angeni to carry out the hijacking operation. After pulling over the taxi at gunpoint and robbing the terrified Devanis as planned, the hijackers eject first Tongo and then Shrien Dewani from the vehicle before eventually stopping the vehicle in a residential area with a hysterical Anni Dewani screaming in fear. The evidence in 2014 trial of Shrien Dewani showed that Kwabe exited the vehicle, opened the rear door and was involved in a struggle with Anni, during which the firearm discharged and a single bullet penetrated Anni's hand and neck. Whether fired accidentally or to silence her screaming, the bullet severed an artery, leading to the tragic loss of Anni's young life. She was 28 years old. Whilst not as salacious and compelling as a tale of the murder-for-hire story of betrayal peddled by the hapless police and facilitated by the media, this more mundane narrative aligns with all the known facts of the case, including the frank initial confessions of the three of the four known perpetrators of the crime. The sexual liaisons and admitted double life of Anni's husband Shrien Dewani, although providing the prosecution with an alleged alternative motive for Anni's killing, turned out to be a coincidental and uncompelling backstory unrelated to the crime. CCTV footage of Dewani giving an envelope payment to Tongo turned out to be naive generosity. Dewani settling the agreed taxi fare as he felt sorry for Tongo, whom he still believed to be an innocent victim of a crime which cost him his car and his livelihood. Judge Traverso, in concluding that there was no credible evidence whatsoever in which to sustain a conviction, halted the trial of Mr. Dewani after hearing the prosecution case. Mr. Dewani was not required to mount a defense. In its failed argument against discharge, South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority (NPA) conceded that its case rested on the witness testimonies of three men: the driver Tongo, the hijacker Kwabe, and the so-called middleman Monde Bolombo. The NPA said all three of these men had taken part in Anni's killing and had provided evidence under plea bargain type arrangements. Tongo in effect got 17 years of a potential 25-year jail sentence in return for his testimony. Kwabe got 8 years of a 25-year jail term. Bolombo was offered immunity from prosecution. The senior police detective was asked about the decision to offer a plea bargain to Tongo, whose evidence was the fulcrum of the prosecution case. He said the decision had been made by the Western Cape's Director of Public Prosecution. That Traverso rejected the testimonies of Tongo, Kwabe and Bolombo means it is reasonable to assume the trio concocted their tale that Dewani arranged the murder. The conspiracy may have been hatched on the various occasions they were permitted to by the police to talk to each other after they were arrested. But did the conspiracy run deeper than that? Was Anni Dewani framed by elements within the South African establishment? Dewani's then spokesman made sweeping statements alleging such a conspiracy. But the only time an allegation of high-level conspiracy emerged in court was when the prosecution provided a transcript of a secretly recorded conversation between Anni Dewani's older brother Priyan and members of Anni's family. Priyan Dewani was revealed as having told Anni's family, "We are not dealing with anything normal here. We are dealing with South Africa. This is not Sweden or the UK where you have a robust police and court system." Certain senior politicians are getting very worried about the tourism situation. He said there was political pressure on them to divert from a robbery which suggests South Africa is unsafe to something more sinister. On 4th August 2018, Anni Hindoja's uncle, acting as spokesperson for the Hindoja family in response to media reports of Shriven Diwani's same-sex relationship, said, "We accept he did not murder Anni, but he lied to us and had a very secret gay life. He owes us an apology for his lies."